Hi everyone, this little video is going over KA2, the cerebral cortex of Unit 3 of the Higher Human Biology course. Now, if you are watching this, you've probably been directed here through one of the e-learning PowerPoints. If not, however, welcome, and I hope it is helpful. Right, the point of this key area is to basically learn about how the brain is organised and how it deals with conscious thought. The rest of the unit, or some of the unit anyway, looks more into stuff like memory and how the brain functions. So this is just like the introduction. By the end of this, you need to be able to identify the locations of the brain. You need to be able to describe the different areas of the cerebral cortex, which is one of the big parts of the brain. You need to be able to talk about how information is processed. And also be able to talk about the structure and the function of something called the corpus luteum. Okay. Here are the SQA notes for KA2. You might want to pause this, take a few notes down or read through it, but this is basically what the SQA want you to know, and what I'm going to do is expand on that to try and aid your understanding of the course content. So, in National 5, Unit 2, Key Area 2, which is control and communication, you were introduced to 3 areas of the brain. Okay, so it would be very helpful if you were feeling confident with this knowledge. So you should be confident that the 3 main sections of the brain are the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the medulla. And the diagram there, which should hopefully be fairly familiar to you, have a little look, and those are the areas and their locations. You should be confident with what each one of those areas does. The cerebrum is responsible for conscious thought, learning, emotions, personality, the bit that kind of makes us who we are. The cerebellum is the thing that controls balance and coordination. And then, of course, we've got the medulla, which is responsible for all the unconscious activities like heart rate and breathing rate. So the main bit we're going to be focusing on is the cerebrum. Now there's a diagram here, and it basically shows all the folds and grooves in the cerebrum, and you're going to see diagrams throughout this whole PowerPoint, and it's going to indicate front and back, or might indicate face, just so you can really orientate yourself as to what we're actually looking at. So when I say front, I'm meaning the front of the head, and when I say back, I'm meaning the back of the head. Okay. Right, so the cerebrum is the largest and uppermost portion of the brain. Okay, it consists of lots of folds, and these folds basically increase surface area so that we can fit more in it. Now, the cerebral cortex is a new term to you. We didn't do that in National 5, and it is basically the outer layer of the cerebrum. Okay, now let's grab my pen. So you've got your cerebral cortex here, and it's basically the shell. It's the outer layer of the cerebrum, as we've said. And if you were to cut into the brain, the middle section is basically not the cerebral cortex. All the rest of the cerebrum is the cerebral cortex, but the middle section is not. Okay, and the cerebral cortex is, we call it the center of conscious thought. It controls intelligence, personality, like your decision making, all the high level functions like language, communication, and memory. It also is the bit that allows you to alter your own behavior in light of experiences. So it's all very well having the memories, but the cerebral cortex allows a high function ability to actually think, oh, this has happened before, so actually I'm now going to do this. So it's a really, really high functioning, important part of the brain. It's split up into many different areas. So we don't look at the cerebral cortex in great detail. You probably will have recognized these sort of brain maps here. The main areas that we need to look at are the sensory areas. So that's obviously all about sensing and detecting change in the environment, dealing with that sort of information. And the sensory areas include the sensory cortex, visual cortex, and auditory cortex. Anything linked to how you can sense the environment. So taste, eyesight, hearing, that sort of thing. There's also the motor area, which is just in the middle, just here. And that's to do with movement and decisions on moving, those sorts of things. And then we've got a lot of association areas, okay? And these are really important. We're going to go into that later. Now we're going to look in greater detail at two of the areas, the motor cortex and the sensory cortex. And I'm going to explain this diagram afterwards. Let me just introduce it for a little bit. Right, so looking at our sensory areas first. Now if I just grab my pen, the sensory area is our blue area here. And this is part of the brain that receives nerve impulses from the sense organs. And these nerve impulses are going to carry information about the environment. So it's things like your eyes, your ears, maybe different areas of your skin, on your hand, your fingers, your arm. These will send messages to your brain about the environment. It's hot here, it's cold here, this is painful to stand here, something like that. Now the motor area, which is just next to it, this is our orange area, the motor area sends nerve impulses. So sensory area receives nerve impulses, but the motor area sends nerve impulses out to the effectors, so muscles and glands, which actually bring about our response. Now I just want you to look a little bit at this diagram here. You quite often will find diagrams that, in my view, look a little bit creepy because they've got like random little faces and arms sort of like hanging out of parts of the brain. So basically what it's showing you is it's another brain map. It's showing you the different parts of the brain, the different folds in the cerebral cortex and what they're responsible for. So if we look at our sensory area, let's just take eyes. Okay, you got your eyes here, okay, and we can maybe come down and do our lips and things. So these might be areas that are going to receive information. Now if you look over at a very similar area of the brain, you've got in your motor area the face and the lips and the jaw. So what we're trying to show you here is that the sensory areas and the motor areas are actually very, very linked. They're closely linked. So the folds in the blue bit that correspond to your face are right next to the folds in the orange bit that correspond to your face. Now just to clarify that your motor cortex, when you've got your face and your lips and your jaw, that'll be stuff like opening your mouth, pursing your lips, you know, something like that. Sticking your tongue out just underneath there, those sorts of things. That would be how your motor side works. Your sense side, if we take tongue for example, might detect a taste on your tongue, whereas your motor cortex would be responsible for making you fold your tongue or roll your tongue. Now the other thing that we need to look at is the association areas, and these ones are really quite fascinating. So the association areas, and you see in this this brain here, we've got our motor cortex and our sensory cortex right here. But the association areas are things like just in the middle of it all. So it brings out your speech and your taste, and you've got your visual cortex down here, and then you've got your visual association area right next to it. So you'll have association areas of the brain right next to the areas that actually deal with the information that they're either receiving or sending out. Because these association areas link up the different parts of the cortex that are involved in processing information and language and things like that. They basically bring different areas together and allow them to work together, and it allows the brain to work out complex learning tasks or carry out complex behaviour. It's these association areas where you get the really high level functioning things. They're very important in personality, imagination and intelligence. There's actually a lot of evidence out there of the localization of brain function. Now this diagram here shows an EEG, and it's basically a person that's got electrodes hooked up to their head, and it reads the electrical activity in the brain. Now what scientists have done is they stimulate different parts of the brain with weak electrical current, so they can send a current into the different part of the brain, and the patient at this time is fully conscious, fully awake. I mean, it's not like proper like electrocuting, like they're going to feel it, but it does affect that area of the brain. Now, what's really interesting is that the doctors can actually, or the scientists can actually ask the patient what they're experiencing. So they can send an electric current into a certain part of the brain, and then the patient can indicate maybe if they can taste something, or maybe if they feel something. For example, if the motor area of the brain is stimulated, the patient will actually make involuntary movements. So he'll start moving, he or she will start moving without even realizing it or meaning to. The other bit is if maybe the visual area of the brain is stimulated, the patient might describe seeing a flash of color or something like that. The other thing that they can do is set up a magnetic resonance imaging thing. They can take a reading of that, an fMRI. And now what this is instead of stimulating parts of the brain, it basically observes which bits of the brain are actually being used. So what they'll do is they'll have the patient or the subject or whatever take part in various tasks, maybe in memory tasks or something. I think in this instance here, it was a memory task. And the coloured areas that are highlighted, they basically show which parts of the brain are active during which tasks. So you could give somebody a kind of language thing, maybe learning a different language, and you'll see which area of the brain lights up. Or maybe a sort of problem solving finger maze, so it's more like motor and coordination, and then a different part of the brain will light up. This has been around for a very, very long time, but it's still absolutely fascinating. We're going to look at a couple examples of when different parts of the brain are damaged, and then this shows more evidence of localization of brain function. So what we've got here is the Broca's areas, and that is responsible for your speech. Now, if this area gets damaged, so injury to the Broca's area, can actually then result in difficulty in speaking. So somebody could be perfectly good at speaking before, communicating very well, but now if you have that area damaged, the individual might be able to identify the words they want to say, but cannot say it. So their understanding of the words and language is there, but they can't actually verbalize it themselves. Now, another area that deals with language, which is over in the auditory association area, is something called the Wernicke's area. Now, the last example, we saw that if you damaged the area in the last example, you knew what you wanted to say, but you couldn't actually say it out loud. Now what we've got is if we damage the Wernicke's area, it results in somebody being able to hear what someone's saying, but then not being able to understand it. So they can hear the words, but they just can't process the meaning of the words. We're now going to look at the cerebral hemispheres, and it's basically another way that the brain is organized. So the cerebrum is divided into two parts, and you'll have heard this before, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And sometimes you'll hear this talked about as in the right brain and the left brain. Okay, as if they're two separate things. And they are. They're two completely separate areas. They're completely split up. And the way it works is that any information or things about, I don't know, the right side of your body, so if I've got my right hand here and I'm gonna, I don't know, I could feel something or pick something up, the part of the brain that actually processes all that on the right side of my body is the left hemisphere. And then anything that I want to process about the left side of my body is processed on the right hemisphere. So basically, information from one side of the body is processed on the opposite side of the cerebrum. And we've got this diagram here just highlighting it. You can see the blue side of the body here, right up the middle, matches with the opposite side of the brain, the blue bit there. So that means anything that you're hearing in this ear is processed on this side of the brain, and anything you're hearing in that ear is processed on that side of the brain. And obviously that works with the whole body there. Visual information is also processed in this way. So the left cerebral hemisphere deals with information from the right visual field. So here you can see on the right we have a dog, and it's the information about this dog will be processed in the left hemisphere. And here we've got our cat in the left visual field, and information about the cat is processed in the right hemisphere. Now, these hemispheres are joined together, although they're two separate entities. Oh, sorry, my mouth's going crazy. They're two separate entities. There is actually something called the corpus callosum, which joins these together. So information can get passed from one hemisphere to the other. The corpus callosum is basically a bundle of nerve fibers, and its main role is just to transfer the information. You can see it highlighted in green here. You can see therefore it's just under the cerebral cortex, and if we look from above you can see that it's just in the middle connecting them. Now, we know the corpus callosum is responsible for sharing information and joining information together because we can look at patients that have actually had this damaged or severed. Okay. There was, and there still is actually, people that suffer from epilepsy. If it's really severe, there's actually a procedure that basically cuts into the corpus callosum to help, for some reason, to help with their seizures, and it actually sometimes either greatly reduces them or removes the seizures altogether. However, there are some pretty big side effects, and they've been used in the study of the brain. These patients have been used in the study of the brain for many, many years. Now, patients that have had this operation that basically splits up the corpus callosum are often said to have split brain syndrome. Okay. I know this is basically a condition that's caused by the split up of the corpus callosum, and you basically see that the brain will function completely independently in two halves. That's why it's called split brain. Okay. As I said before, I'm not too sure why, but these operations will actually reduce the risks of any physical injury during epileptic seizures and things. Now, if you look at these diagrams here, the top one there just basically shows you what the brain looks like from the top, and then on this side it shows some of the severing that's happened, and that's what I kind of meant by that lightning bolt. Now, if you look here, this is actually somebody undergoing the split brain surgery. So they actually, it's a big operation. You'll obviously be put under. They actually saw into your brain, cut open your brain, cut open your skull to get right down into that area here to start basically severing and removing those, splitting up those nerve endings and nerve cells to stop any connection there. Now, I really like this diagram, and if you are following the e-learning through school, after this PowerPoint, there is an absolutely fascinating video where they look at somebody that's got split brain syndrome, and you can really see how the two sides of the brain work completely independently. Right, so what they do with a lot of these sort of tests, investigations to see how the brain works, is they will have an individual sitting down here, we've got there, and then there'll be a screen, and then on the right visual field or the left visual field they'll put something up. So in this instance there's a word that's flashed briefly up in the right field of view, and the word's face. Now we didn't mention it earlier, but you might already know this. When we talk about the left brain and the right brain, or sorry, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, there's parts of those areas that are have greater responsibility for stuff. So, for example, the left hemisphere is dominant for verbal processing. So more of the verbal cues are processed on the left side than the right side. Now, if somebody has had their corpus callosum severed, I don't know if I said that right, severed, then there won't be a connection between the two sides. So in this instance, the word face appears, and because it's on the right side, the left hemisphere can process that, and the patient can say it says face. They know it says face. But so they can actually verbalize it and say face. But if the word face appears on the left visual field, the right hemisphere can't process that. It's not got that dominant bit for verbal processing. So the patient themselves cannot identify that word as face. They can't say it out loud. But what they can do is they can make that connection that a face, they know what a face is, so they can draw a face. They just can't say face. This might be a little bit difficult for it to understand with my explanation that you're following, sorry. But watch the videos that I put up, and they're really, really fascinating, okay? So that concludes our key area 2, the cerebral cortex. And hopefully it's helped you understand the content for this part of the course a little bit better. And if you've got any questions, please just ask them on Teams, or if you're not part of our school, you could just comment underneath and I'll try and get back to you. Okay, thanks for listening. See you later, guys.